Okay, let's get right into it. We're going to be looking at what the source material tells us about a really critical failure inside the UK's education system. We're talking about that tough intersection where race and special educational needs, well, they just collide. And boom, we start with this headline. It's from The Voice newspaper, and honestly, it just cuts right to the chase. Black special needs kids failed by schools. This is the crisis we're digging into. It's about the very real struggle Black families go through just to get the support their kids need. So you gotta ask, how did we even get here? And what the reports make really clear is that this isn't about, a few bad apples or a couple of underperforming schools. Nope. To really get it, we have to look under the hood at the actual machinery of the system. Okay, so there's this really important concept that comes up in the source material, and it's called systemic cogs. Think of it like this. All these different parts of the education system. You've got policy, institutional bias, maybe teachers who just don't have enough racial awareness. They're all working together like gears in a machine. And that machine, well, it ends up enabling and a lot of times even hiding the exclusion of Black children. And let's be clear, this is not some new issue that just popped up. Not at all. I mean, just look at this timeline. The sources trace this stuff all the way back decades. We're talking the 60s and 70s, when Black children were wrongly labeled educationally subnormal. Then you have calls for change in '99. And then fast forward to 2015, and a report basically says, yeah, progress has been super, super slow. It's a long, frustrating story. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. The sources start to zoom in on the very people who are supposed to be helping, the educational psychologists, or EPs. And the tough part is, the reports suggest that even when they have the best intentions, they can accidentally become part of the problem. Yeah, check out this quote from Dr. Shungu Hilda Magadza. She talks about what she calls the nice professionals problem. What does that mean? Well, she's saying that a lot of these EPs, they want to be liked. They want to keep a good, smooth relationship with the schools they work with. And sometimes that desire to be nice and not rock the boat is stronger than the need to actually speak up and challenge practices that might be discriminatory. That silence, it ends up being a kind of complicity. So what you end up with are these two totally different ways of doing the job. On one hand, you've got the nice professional. They keep their head down, they don't cause trouble, but often it's the child who pays the price. And then on the other side, you have the anti-racist advocate. They're the ones willing to challenge the system, to ask those hard questions, because for them, the child's needs come first, period. Okay, so let's move away from the abstract for a second. Let's talk about how this actually impacts a real kid. The reports give us a case study, and honestly, this is where it all becomes painfully real. So we meet a young boy the reports call Lewis. And Lewis is a bright kid, high average cognitive ability. But he also has some specific learning difficulties. He needs support, but the potential is absolutely there. But here's the thing. That's not what the school saw. They didn't see a kid who was struggling to learn. Instead, they saw his behavior through this really damaging lens that experts call adultification. Basically, they treated him like he was older and more threatening than he actually was. So his immaturity wasn't seen as immaturity, it was seen as a threat. His cries for help weren't seen as cries for help. They were seen as aggression. And so what was the result? Punishment, not support. In just one single term, Lewis got 4 suspensions and 8 detentions, all while the actual reason for his behavior, his learning difficulties, was just ignored. And this brings us right to the heart of it, to the really uncomfortable question that the source material keeps asking. You have to wonder, if Lewis was white, would the school have seen him differently? Would he have gotten help instead of getting suspended? Now, Lewis's story is heartbreaking, but it's important to understand it didn't just happen in a vacuum. It's happening inside a much wider system, the Special Educational Needs and Disabilities System, or SEND. And according to the sources, that whole system is basically in a state of collapse. The experts describe it as a vicious cycle. It goes something like this. There's a massive, soaring demand for these formal assessments. They're called EHCPs. This paperwork totally eats up all the time of the educational psychologists. That means they have 0 time left for the crucial early intervention work, the stuff that could actually prevent problems from getting worse. So without that early support, kids' issues get more intense, which, you guessed it, leads to even more requests for those formal assessments. It's a horrible feedback loop, and the person who loses most is the child. And as if that cycle isn't bad enough, it's being slammed by a massive workforce crisis. I mean, look at this number. Since 2010, the country is down 360 full-time educational psychologists. This is happening at the exact same time that the need for them is just going through the roof. And the data, well, the data speaks for itself. Requests for those formal support plans are up 91%. But check this out. This is the real shocker. The number of parents who are so desperate that they're taking their local authorities to a tribunal, we're talking a stressful, expensive, last-ditch legal fight, that number has exploded by 250%. What that tells you is that the system isn't just creaking, it is profoundly failing these families. So, okay, we've got this systemic racial bias, and it's crashing into a support system that's already collapsing under its own weight. It's a perfect storm. So the sources ask the big question, where do we go from here? What's the solution? It's not all doom and gloom. The reports do offer some hope, and they lay out some really concrete steps for change. We're talking about things like mandatory anti-racism training for everyone, a big shift away from those rigid, zero-tolerance discipline policies to something more understanding, more trauma-informed, and, of course, the big one, more money, specifically ring-fenced for SEND, plus a real funded plan for that early intervention we talked about, and finally, holding schools and local authorities accountable when things go wrong. But here's the final massive question that some of the experts are asking. Is all of that enough? Is it enough to just tinker with the cogs of a machine that's fundamentally broken? Or, as they argue, does the UK need something much bigger? A complete overhaul, a SEND revolution that finally puts the needs of every single child, especially the most vulnerable, right at the absolute heart of the education system.